Well, this story I heard many, many years ago from Curtis Dupuy, who lives on the Chehalis Reservation in the state of Oregon. Excuse me, no, in the state of Washington. But Curtis is actually a very modern man. At that time, he was a bureaucrat for the state of Washington, despite living on the reservation. I tell this story with his permission. Curtis calls the story Mosquitoes, but I like to call it blood soup. Long ago, when the world was young, all the animal people and the Chehalis people lived together. And they got along really well, but none of them really liked the mosquitoes very much. Because you see, at that time, the mosquitoes came in 3 sizes. The grown-up mosquitoes were the size of soccer balls. The teenage mosquitoes were the size of softballs. It was just the little bitty babies that were like the mosquitoes that bite you and me today. Now, just imagine a soccer ball-sized mosquito sitting down on you and sucking your blood. You'd feel pretty weak and sick afterwards. And that's what was happening to the animal people and the Chehalis people, and they were tired of it. So they called a meeting to try to figure out what to do. And somebody said, I know, let's invite them to a meal and we'll feed them so much they can't fly, and then we can conk them on the head and throw them in the fire. Well, everybody thought that was a good idea, so they said, let's make fish soup. Fish soup was their favorite. So they invited the mosquitoes on a certain day to come down to Indian Beach where the fishing was so good. Well, they laid the fire and they got their big old soup pot and they filled it with water and they put in some onions and spices and things. And then after they had caught and cleaned all the fish, they put that fish in there and they stirred that soup and they stirred that soup. And oh, it smelled so good. It was hard not to eat it before the mosquitoes came, but they really wanted to get rid of them, so they waited. Well, finally, the soup was done. It was time, and those mosquitoes came flying in. They looked in that cooking pot, and they kept right on flying. They didn't want any fish soup. So the people and animals ate up the fish soup and said, what are we going to do? Well, let's try bean soup. Bean soup is almost as good as fish soup. So they set another date and they invited the mosquitoes. And when the day came, they laid the fire and they got out the big old cooking pot and they put in red beans and black beans and white beans and kidney beans and green beans and soybeans and all the kind of beans you could think of, along with some other vegetables and spices, and they began to stir that soup after they lit the fire. Oh, it was so hard not to eat that soup. It smelled delicious, but they really wanted to get rid of those mosquitoes, so they didn't eat the bean soup. Finally, it was done, and it was time for the mosquitoes to come. They came flying in, and they looked in that cooking pot. They turned around, and they flew back the way they had come. They didn't want any bean soup either. Well, the people and animals said, I guess we might as well eat up the soup. And when it was done, they said, I guess we're going to just have to live with the mosquitoes. Oh, now. Oh, let's try one more thing, somebody said. Let's feed them what we know they'll eat. What's that? Blood soup. Blood Soup? Where are we going to get blood to make soup for the mosquitoes? Well, where did the mosquitoes always get their blood? From us. Well, nobody liked that idea, but nobody had a better one. So they set the date and they invited the mosquitoes. And when the day came, they lit the fire and they got out the cooking pot and everybody lined up. They held out a hand or a paw over that cooking pot and somebody sliced it. They dripped a little bit of their blood down into the cooking pot. It came Bear's turn, and Bear said, I'll give you a paw if you try to slice my hand. Well, they let Bear go on by. It came Skunk's turn, and Skunk turned around and said, I'll give you a tail. And they let Skunk go on by too. But everybody else held out a hand or a paw over that cooking pot. Somebody sliced it, and they dripped a little bit of their blood down into that cooking pot. Well, when everybody'd had their turn, they lit the fire and they stirred that soup and they stirred that soup. And do you know, it was a whole lot easier that day not to eat the soup while they waited for the mosquitoes. Well, finally the soup was done and it was time, and the mosquitoes came flying in. They looked in that pot, blood soup. They were so excited. They began to eat and eat and eat and eat. And when the pot was empty, they were just walking around talking to everybody. You know how when you have dinner that somebody's invited you to, you stay and make polite conversation for a while. Well, pretty soon, the people and animals decided it was time. And everybody picked up a stick and began conking those mosquitoes on the head, throwing them in the fire. Conking those mosquitoes on the head, throwing them in the fire. Conking those mosquitoes on the head, throwing them in the fire. Conking those mosquitoes on the head, throwing them in the fire. Till pretty soon they looked around. All the soccer ball sized mosquitoes were gone. All the softball sized mosquitoes were gone. Only the little bitty babies were left. Everybody said, oh, that was hard. I'm so hot. I'm so tired. Let's get rid of the rest of these little babies some other day. And they all agreed, but you know, somehow they never did. And that's why you and I are still bothered by mosquitoes today.